Okay, so this is a new chapter in the second edition, so I'm adding it here. It's called Understanding Resistance to Knowledge and Change. Obviously, there are mental models which prevent people from adopting good ideas or understanding new things that may be beneficial to them, but as we discussed before, some things makes them take the rational ignorance pathway, where even knowing that it's good for them doesn't necessarily lead to them accepting it, adopting it, especially if it involves behavioral change cost or something like that. What does it say? Despite the unprecedented accumulation of scientific evidence of staggering sustainability challenges, some of which may even threaten the survival of humankind, there has been so far minimal concrete action taken by policymakers and the general public concerning most of them. So this idea that it may threaten the survival of humankind is something we keep saying. Let's say a liberal person from Sweden keeps saying it, but the fact is not everybody perceives it that way. People still keep thinking they will not be affected by climate change, that there will be ways to make money or survive with technology and so on. So I don't agree that everybody perceives it as a threat to humankind, and even those who perceive it as such don't necessarily do something about it. They don't necessarily go live off the grid and stop eating meat or stop driving and so on and so forth. So this is a bit more complicated than simply recognizing the sustainability challenge and saying let's do something about it. Or they may say let's do something about it, but hope that somebody will do something about it. So how is this even possible? According to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we are on a highway to climate hell and gradually committing suicide by proxy in relation to biodiversity loss. Again, these are very alarmist languages, not necessarily supported by data. Planet will survive, some biodiversity will survive, some species will pay a price, and some species always pay a price. Doesn't mean we don't have to do anything about our lifestyles and energy use and emissions, but I'm not convinced such language really helps. Yet, we are still hardly doing anything to save ourselves, at least not on a scale that matters. Similar assessments are made concerning many other sustainability challenges, not only regarding global challenges, but also local ones. I would again like to stress that we are in a carbon trap, so everything we use is carbon based, so that's a big challenge that the system has to worry about. Understanding why people fail to pay attention and take concrete action against even the most blatant problem is an essential and difficult task. Yes, of course, that's what we've been saying. Lack of information is often considered a main reason, since people may not be aware of the extent of the problem, its potential consequences, if not addressed, or the available solutions. People may of course not have access to accurate and reliable information about the problem, or they may not be able to understand it if it is not presented in an accessible way and they have adequate education. However, there cannot be a single policymaker in the world today, at least not on the national level, without access to sufficient information about climate change, biodiversity loss, and several other pressing sustainability challenges to grasp their acuteness. So the stress on information being a limitation is also not something I agree with, because as I just said, everything we do, everything we eat, everything we drink, everything we buy, drive, wear has carbon footprint. So that's where the problem is. Even if I'm fully aware that emissions are way too high, I can basically buy nothing that is carbon free, so that's a big challenge. So similarly, it's impossible to live anywhere with access to basic education and reasonably free mass media without having access to abundant information about many sustainability challenges and how our leisure travel, local transportation habits, food preferences, and consumption choices exacerbate them. Isn't that the main point? That there is nothing we can do that doesn't exacerbate the problem, which means we need to change the way we are doing these things and not worry about traveling less, eating less, and so on and so forth. That's not possible. Whilst some individuals do change their behavior when presented with information about their environmental footprint, the assumption that people in general are motivated by such ecological knowledge is flawed at best. There are, in other words, other factors than merely a lack of information that make people susceptible to resisting knowledge and change. There are, in other words, other factors than merely a lack of information that make people susceptible to resisting knowledge and change. So here is another prop: knowledge resistance explained by Banksy. It says here, I don't believe in global warming. Whoever has written it is watching the flood level come up to the door into the building, maybe. So knowledge is not the information is not the limitation. So where does resistance to knowledge and change come from? Notions of knowledge resistance or fact resistance are becoming increasingly common in both academic and public discourse, although there is significant variation in how these resistance phenomena are described. The overall impression is that they are becoming more widespread and severe. Of course, there are vested interests like the energy industries and politicians which are spreading misinformation as well. And if you are searching for something, then the way the search engines work, they keep feeding you everything in that direction, so confirmation bias becomes very, very easy. Some scholars argue for a need to distinguish between fact resistance and knowledge resistance, with the former implying irrational resistance to clear and indisputable facts, while the latter denotes a more complex, profound phenomenon that can have its own rationality. So there is the rational ignorance, which is knowledge resistance, let's say. Confirmation bias, where you ignore fact when it contradicts your belief. So that's fact resistance. This chapter is about knowledge resistance in a broad sense, spanning a wide range of phenomena in which information and knowledge plausibly inferred from empirical observations are resisted due to various factors. Such knowledge resistance is often intrinsically linked to resistance to change, which I will return to in a moment. So let's look at knowledge resistance here. Knowledge resistance entails ignorance, but not all the ignorance stems from knowledge resistance. So it can happen both ways. Knowledge resistance from lack of knowledge, or knowledge resistance from ignorance. Ordinary ignorance can indeed arise from a genuine lack of information, with the emphasis on genuine being central and informative. If someone truly lacks the information necessary as evidence for a particular knowledge claim, we cannot assert that they resist the knowledge. They may well change their mind once they are exposed to the information. Resistance is an active process, although it can be either conscious or unconscious. For knowledge resistance to be present, the information must be available to the individual who actively resists the knowledge claim it entails. So you are exposed, you know it's true, but you are just simply not accepting it. However, actively looking the other way when presented with evidence is also knowledge resistance, since the lack of information is not genuine but purposeful. So not going looking for facts versus ignoring facts when presented are quite different, and one is active, one can be passive. Whilst ignorance is often portrayed as something altogether negative that actors have an evident interest in overcoming or eliminating, actors may also seek to preserve their ignorance for various reasons, which is what I would call rational ignorance. Such ideas are visible in everyday sayings such as "what you don't know can't hurt you" and "ignorance is bliss." When an individual decides not to acquire available information for whatever reason, the resulting ignorance can be referred to as strategic ignorance. The practices of obfuscation and deliberate insulation from unsettling information. There are many reasons for such strategic ignorance, which I will return to throughout the chapter. Information may hurt. Ignorance can be a valuable tool for governing and social control, and cultivating ignorance may be more advantageous than cultivating knowledge. Even argues, so here Tausig even argues that knowing what not to know is the most potent form of knowledge. not cluttering your brain with the things that you don't need to know can be a good strategy. However, strategic ignorance can be both consciously and unconsciously nurtured, and the most fundamental source of strategic ignorance is avoiding looking for information and knowledge in the first place. So lots of words, but you also know that climate impacts can happen far away, and you may think the way it is being presented that it will happen in 2100 and not now. So there are maybe just confusion, and the information or knowledge being presented may be not seeming so urgent, and that is the basic human tendency to not ensure about or worry about things that are either too far in the future or are seen as somebody else's responsibility. If you are saying atmosphere is very polluted and you are not feeling sick, you may think somebody has to clean it. Right? Who's that somebody is not always well defined, as opposed to ensuring your own future by collecting wealth, ensuring your car, your house, your health, and so on. Right? So Gluer and Wickforce propose approaching knowledge resistance as a form of irrational resistance to the total available empirical evidence. So this is active process. It means that for a knowledge claim to be plausible, it must be consistent with the totality of all empirical evidence. That's not to say that all evidence must point towards the exact same conclusion, but multiple evidences may be pointing to some risk that is unacceptable. That's not to say that all evidence must point towards the exact same conclusion. They rarely do in our complex world. It requires nonetheless considerations of all empirical evidence when making the knowledge claim and moderating how it is formulated depending on the evidential foundation. Remember from chapter 7 that knowledge comprises beliefs in whose validity we are reasonably confident. A knowledge claim requires, in other words, the backing of adequate evidence, even if some evidence may deviate, whereas an erroneous belief can be held regardless of the available evidence. That's basically confirmation bias, where you may believe something and you may keep ignoring evidence that opposes it, and sometimes when it's not convincing enough, but sometimes even when it's convincing enough that your belief is wrong. In short, knowledge requires justification, disqualifying even the most accurate guess from ever becoming knowledge without sufficient evidence. Let's look at a prop and stop it. So here is the knowledge claim with lots of pieces of evidence coming at you from different directions, some of which may not be pointing at the exact same thing as the others are. This one is even going in the opposite direction. They have different directions and arrow lengths because some may be more convincing but tangential, some may be more direct and stronger, and some may be going in random directions, whereas erroneous belief may depend on information that is not even consistent with each other, with whatever little comes at you that confirms your bias or your belief may be accepted more easily than all the other evidence that is going in the opposite direction. So you are ignoring a lot of you are relying on a lot of information that is erroneous here because it disagrees with, because it agrees with your erroneous belief, whereas here you are ignoring a lot of knowledge that is pointing to you and supporting the knowledge claim, but you are ignoring it nonetheless. So let's stop there. I'll come back and continue because this one is already 14 minutes long. So I'll come back and continue resistance to knowledge and change. Okay.